At night, the port does not announce itself. It exhales slowly, like a place that knows tomorrow will arrive whether anyone stays awake to witness it or not. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. The Roman Mediterranean port around 300 AD does not shut down so much as it loosens its grip on the day. There is no bell to signal closure, no formal agreement that work has ended. Activity simply thins until it becomes optional. A few footsteps fade. A voice finishes a sentence and does not start another. The city nearby lowers its volume and the harbor follows, not out of obedience but out of long practice. The ships are still, not dramatically still, not posed like monuments, but settled, the way animals rest when they trust the ground beneath them. Their hulls press gently into the water as if reminding it of shared history. Ropes hang with just enough slack to prove that no one expects sudden departure. Anchors are already doing their quiet work, holding without complaint, without needing credit. Nothing here looks abandoned. Everything looks paused. This is not the stillness of fear. It is the stillness of completion. The day has already asked enough from wood and water and muscle. Now the port returns the favor by not asking anything back. The sea responds in kind, tapping the stone key softly, repeating a sound so familiar it no longer tries to be heard. The waves are not scenery, they are maintenance. Light survives in careful amounts. A few lamps burn near the warehouses, not to attract attention but to prevent unnecessary accidents. Oil is expensive, darkness is free. The port understands the difference. Shadows stretch across crates and amphorae stacked in neat, patient rows. These goods are not restless. They do not wonder where they will go next. They are content to remain inventory until morning decides otherwise. The warehouses themselves feel heavier at night, not with danger, but with responsibility. Doors are closed, not slammed, secured by routine rather than suspicion. Inside, grain rests without being measured. Wine does not need to prove its quality. Cloth remains folded, spared for a few hours from being evaluated, priced, and negotiated. Commerce has gone to sleep, and no one resents it for doing so. There is no bargaining after dark, not because it is forbidden, but because it would feel unnecessary. The arguments can wait. The clever phrasing can be saved. Even the most persuasive merchant understands that some victories are better postponed until voices are rested and patience has been replenished. Tonight offers no deals, and that is quietly agreed upon by everyone who matters. People leave the port without ceremony. They do not announce that they are done for the day. They simply become absent. A worker steps away from the pier and does not return. A sailor finds his path toward food, shelter, or sleep. No one is counted. No one checks who is last. The port does not need a hero to stand watch over emptiness. It only needs enough trust to believe that morning will handle itself. What keeps this place functioning is not vigilance but habit. The port survives because it knows how to repeat itself without exhausting the people who depend on it. The same movements tomorrow require rest tonight. Silence here is not a void. It is a tool. By allowing sound to recede, the harbor preserves its ability to speak again. Later. There is something faintly ironic about this. An empire known for roads, ships, and expansion relies on stillness to maintain its reach. The port that feeds movement understands when not to move. It does not romanticize the night. It does not pretend to be timeless. It simply recognizes that continuity is built from thousands of ordinary pauses stacked carefully together. As the lamps dim further and the water continues its slow conversation with stone, the port remains exactly what it needs to be. Not impressive, not symbolic, just intact. Tomorrow will arrive whether or not anyone worries about it. The ropes will be untied. The doors will open. Voices will return. For now, the port rests, confident that this is not an ending, but the most practical way to continue. By the time night settles fully over the Roman Mediterranean port, the ships have already made their decision. They are not waiting for permission. They are not checking the horizon one last time. They simply remain. Hulls press into water with the weight of familiarity, as if both have agreed that movement has finished its obligations for the day. Nothing about their stillness suggests failure. This is not what a stranded vessel looks like. This is what a vessel does when it understands timing. Each ship carries evidence of recent effort. The marks on the wood where ropes have been tightened and loosened too many times to count. The faint residue of salt and cargo dust clinging to the deck. The subtle tilt that reveals how weight was distributed earlier in the day. These signs do not vanish at night, they rest. The ship does not reset itself. It pauses exactly as it is, trusting that tomorrow will accept it in this condition. Ropes play their quiet role without drama. They do not strain, they do not hum. They hold with the confidence of something designed to be boring. A good rope at night is one that attracts no attention at all. Not sit where they were tied, neither proud nor decorative. They are not symbols of control. They are agreements between hands and materials that both sides will behave as expected, until further notice. Anchors do their work invisibly. No one stands nearby to admire them. No one thanks them for keeping everything in place. They disappear into water and sediment and silence, doing the unglamorous task of preventing surprise. This is not heroic labor. It is preventive labor. The kind history almost never pauses to describe, because nothing goes wrong when it succeeds. The ships themselves do not imagine departure. They are not restless. They do not ache for open water. That kind of longing belongs to stories told later, not to wood and tar in the present. For now, the vessels are content to be part of the port's stillness, another structure that has temporarily chosen not to move. They are not dreaming of destinations. They are recovering from having been useful. Night removes urgency from everything it touches. Without sunlight, there is no advantage to speed. No sail can outperform another. No captain can demonstrate skill through timing. Darkness equalizes ambition. It turns the port into a place where comparison becomes meaningless. A small cargo ship and a large merchant vessel share the same quiet. Both are equally inactive. Both are equally sufficient. The absence of motion does not suggest vulnerability. On the contrary, it suggests coordination. Everyone involved understands that departure requires more than readiness. It requires light, labor, and a reason. None of those are available at the moment, and no one pretends otherwise. To leave now would not be brave. It would be inefficient. Somewhere near the docks, a ship creaks softly as wood adjusts to temperature and moisture. This sound is not a warning. It is a conversation between materials that have learned to tolerate each other. The water replies with a small movement against the hull, not a wave, just enough to confirm presence. These exchanges are so common that they no longer register as events. They are background assurances. What is remarkable is how unremarkable this all feels to those who know it well. No one stands staring at the ships in awe of their stillness. No one records the moment when the last vessel ceased movement. The port does not treat immobility as something that needs explanation. It is simply the next stage in a predictable sequence. Work leads to rest. Rest leads to work again. Even the crews have adjusted their sense of responsibility. They do not hover near the gangplanks, waiting for trouble. They have already done what is required of them. The ship has been secured. The agreements with the port have been fulfilled. Staying awake would not add value. It would only add fatigue. So they leave, trusting the systems they have repeated countless times before. This trust is not naive. It is trained. It has been earned through nights when nothing happened and mornings when everything resumed exactly as expected. The port has taught its people that constant vigilance is not the same as reliability. Sometimes reliability is knowing when to stop paying attention. There is something quietly humorous in this arrangement. These ships are often celebrated as instruments of empire, tools of connection, symbols of reach and influence. And yet here they are, contributing to imperial stability by doing absolutely nothing. They do not conquer. They do not transport. They do not impress. They rest. And in resting, they ensure that they can perform all those impressive functions later without breaking. Night also strips the ships of their narratives. Without crowds, without commands, without destinations announced, a ship becomes just an object in space. Wood shaped by intention, yes, but not currently fulfilling that intention. This temporary loss of purpose is not a crisis. It is maintenance. Even meaning needs time off. The port accommodates this perfectly. It does not demand that ships justify their presence after dark. It does not ask them to perform symbolic gestures of readiness. As long as they are where they should be, tied as they should be, the port is satisfied. The relationship is practical, not emotional. From a distance, the line of ships appears almost uniform. Details dissolve into silhouettes. Individual histories blur. At night, the port does not distinguish between famous voyages and forgettable ones. Everything becomes equally quiet, equally suspended. The hierarchy of significance collapses into shared inactivity. This is perhaps the most stable arrangement imaginable. Nothing is being tested. Nothing is being proven. The night is not a challenge to overcome. It is a condition to be used. By staying still, the ships align themselves with the larger rhythm of the port, the city, and the sea itself. Movement pauses so that continuity can persist. When morning comes, the ships will remember what to do. The ropes will be loosened. The anchors will release their grip. Orders will return. Destinations will matter again. But none of that needs rehearsal tonight. Preparation has limits. Beyond a certain point, waiting becomes the most responsible action available. So the ships stay, not forgotten, not neglected, simply inactive in the most intentional way possible. In a world that often celebrates motion for its own sake, this quiet cooperation between wood, water, and time is what keeps the system intact. The port does not collapse when ships stop moving. It depends on it. The water does not wait for attention. It does not prepare itself for observation. Long before anyone thinks to describe it, the sea is already doing what it will continue to do all night. It moves not forward, not backward, but against the same stone it has always known, repeating a motion that carries no message and asks for no interpretation. At the Roman Mediterranean port, water is not scenery. During the day it is worked, measured, crossed, and negotiated with. At night it is simply present. The waves soften as activity recedes, not because the sea has moods, but because fewer interruptions remain to disturb its rhythm. Without oars, without hulls pushing insistently through it, the surface returns to its default behavior. Gentle contact, repetition, continuity. The sound of the water becomes the dominant voice of the harbor once human voices withdraw. It is not loud enough to command attention, but persistent enough to fill the space left behind. A small lap against the quay, a slight pull at a rope, a faint echo beneath the pier where darkness gathers more thickly. None of these sounds rise to the level of events. They are not signals. They are confirmations. The sea does not narrate the night. It does not hint at journeys past or storms to come. It does not remind anyone of danger. It simply maintains its relationship with the port, one soft contact at a time. The stones do not answer. They receive. This exchange has been happening for longer than memory finds useful to record. There is a particular calm that comes from knowing the water will behave as expected, not in the sense of safety guaranteed, but in the sense of familiarity. The port trusts the sea because it understands its habits. The sea, in return, does not demand novelty. It does not escalate its presence to remain interesting. It repeats itself until repetition becomes reassurance. At night, the water loses its theatrical potential. No sunlight fractures it into brilliance. No crowds frame it as spectacle. Without reflections of banners or sails, it settles into darker tones, absorbing light rather than performing with it. This is water uninterested in being admired. It exists at a level beneath commentary. The waves arrive at the stone edge with no ambition to impress. They do not build toward anything. Each one ends quietly where it began, replaced immediately by another nearly identical movement. If there is a lesson here, it is not announced. The water does not pause to check whether anyone is listening closely enough to learn it. For the port, this constancy is invaluable. The sound of water acts as a baseline against which everything else can be measured. A sudden noise would be noticed because the water is so predictable. Silence would feel strange because the water never stops entirely. It keeps the night anchored, preventing it from drifting into emptiness. There is something faintly ironic about how much history depends on this unremarkable persistence. The port exists because water continues to arrive and depart without personality. Trade routes are possible because the sea does not improvise. Empires rely on predictability far more than on drama, and the water provides exactly that by refusing to become a character in its own story. The sea does not know it is central. It does not understand its role in connecting cities or sustaining economies. It does not care that maps will be drawn across it or that chronicles will name it. These meanings belong entirely to those who pass over it during the day. At night, the water returns to being water, indifferent to interpretation. Sometimes a small shift in wind changes the pattern slightly. The waves angle themselves differently against the quay. The sound deepens or thins. This is not a message, it is an adjustment. The port accepts it without concern. Minor variation does not threaten stability. It confirms it. From the perspective of the water, the port is simply another edge. Stone meeting movement. A pause in continuity. The sea does not treat it as a destination. It arrives, touches, withdraws, repeats. This lack of attachment is precisely what allows attachment to exist elsewhere. The water's indifference makes human planning possible. As the night deepens, the water becomes less noticeable, not because it stops, but because it blends into the background of awareness. People sleep through it. Lamps flicker without responding to it. Ships remain still above it. The sea continues its work unnoticed, which is exactly how it prefers it, if preference can be assigned at all. The absence of expectation is what defines this relationship. The water does not expect stories. It does not expect to be remembered. It does not wait for someone to stand at the edge and feel something profound. It continues regardless of interpretation. Meaning is optional. Motion is not. There is comfort in this. In a world where so much depends on intention and effort, the water offers a model of persistence without purpose. It demonstrates that continuity does not require motivation. It requires only repetition performed consistently enough to be trusted. The port listens without listening. The water speaks without speaking. Together they maintain a night that does not need to justify itself. Nothing remarkable happens. And because of that, everything remains possible. When morning comes, the water will look different, but it will not be different. Sunlight will return stories to it. People will project significance onto its surface again. For now, it stays as it is, moving gently, endlessly, without expecting anything back. Night does not arrive to erase the port. It arrives to negotiate with it. And the port responds, not by resisting darkness, but by allowing light to retreat to its most practical form. Nothing here is illuminated for effect. There is no attempt to conquer the dark or prove mastery over it. Light remains only where it still serves a purpose, and nowhere else. A few lamps stay lit near the warehouses, their flames small and disciplined. They do not reach far. They do not promise visibility beyond a few careful steps. Their task is modest and clearly defined. Prevent accidents. Mark edges. Confirm that structures still exist. Anything beyond that would be wasteful. Oil is not endless. Night is patient. The glow from these lamps does not compete with the darkness. It cooperates with it. Shadows are allowed to exist, to stretch across the ground without apology. The port does not fear what it cannot fully see. It has learned which shapes matter and which can remain implied. Clarity here is situational rather than absolute. Light during the day has ambitions. It exposes, compares, accelerates. At night, light becomes conservative. It withdraws from commentary. It no longer highlights productivity or success. It simply keeps things from becoming dangerous. This shift is not accidental. It is a learned behavior, refined over countless nights when too much light solved nothing and cost too much. The lamps themselves are unremarkable. Clay, metal, glass, wick. No decoration worth mentioning. They are not offerings to beauty, they are tools. Their flames flicker gently, responding to the slightest movement of air, never fully still, never fully out of control. This instability is accepted. Perfection is not required, continuity is. Beyond these points of light, the port dissolves into darkness. Ships become silhouettes. Ropes disappear into shadow. The water reflects nothing but faint glimmers that break and reform with each small movement. The darkness is not empty. It is simply unlit. And the port has learned that these are not the same thing. There is a quiet intelligence in knowing how much light is enough. Too little and movement becomes dangerous. Too much and rest becomes impossible. The port settles into a balance that favors preservation over display. Nothing here needs to be impressive after dark. It only needs to survive until morning. This careful use of light also reshapes behavior. Without bright illumination, people move differently. Steps slow, gestures become smaller, voices lower instinctively. The environment encourages restraint without enforcing it. The port does not issue rules about silence or stillness. The lighting makes excess effort feel unnecessary. Even commerce responds to this dimness. With no bright spaces to gather attention, there is no incentive to perform. Goods remain goods, not spectacles. Labels are unreadable, colors indistinct. Value pauses. In this light, objects are freed temporarily from being assessed. They exist without being judged. There is something faintly ironic in how an empire known for its monuments chooses understatement at night. During the day, Rome builds to be seen. At night, it allows itself to recede. The port reflects this perfectly. It does not assert dominance over the dark. It accepts the limits of visibility as part of its operating conditions. Light, here, is not a promise of safety. It is a reduction of risk. No one mistakes a lamp for protection. It cannot stop theft, storms, or accidents entirely. It can only make the most common movements slightly less hazardous. And that is enough. The port understands diminishing returns. As the night deepens, some lamps are extinguished. Not all at once, not ceremonially. One by one, as their usefulness declines. A corner no longer needs marking. A path is no longer traveled. Darkness expands naturally into the space left behind. There is no panic about this. It is expected. The remaining lights take on greater significance not because they are brighter, but because they are rarer. Each one marks a node of minimal activity, a place where someone might still pass, still need to see. These lights do not invite congregation. They allow passage. They are subtle permissions, not calls to action. In the absence of strong light, the senses recalibrate. Sound becomes more informative than sight. Texture matters more than color. The port does not become less knowable. It becomes knowable in a different way. Those who work here understand this shift intuitively. They do not fumble or hesitate. Their bodies remember paths, even when their eyes cannot confirm them. Darkness, then, is not an interruption. It is an operating mode, one that favors memory over immediacy, experience over display. The port functions at night by relying on what has already been learned, not by demanding new input. This is why excessive lighting would be counterproductive. It would suggest that nothing can be trusted without constant visibility. The lamps burn quietly, consuming oil at a steady pace. Their flames do not flare dramatically. They know they must last. A lamp that exhausts itself too quickly is a failure, no matter how bright it once was. Endurance matters more than intensity. This principle extends beyond lighting. It reflects a broader logic of the port. Everything here is calibrated for repetition, for nights that resemble each other closely enough to be predictable. Light is used the same way routines are used, sparingly, reliably, without embellishment. There are no reflections meant to inspire awe. The water catches only fragments of glow, broken and unstable. Anyone looking for beauty must accept it in pieces. The port does not assemble a picture for admiration. It offers fragments and trusts the observer not to demand more. In this environment, darkness becomes a collaborator rather than an adversary. It reduces the temptation to overwork. It signals closure without command. It creates a shared understanding that not everything needs to be visible all the time. The port thrives on this restraint. By the time most lamps have been reduced to embers or extinguished entirely, the harbor exists in a state of near invisibility. And yet nothing essential has vanished. Ships remain secured, warehouses remain closed, paths remain where they have always been. The absence of light does not erase structure. It merely removes commentary. Morning will reverse this gradually. Lamps will be refilled, flames will return, edges will sharpen, but night has done its work. It has protected the port from excess, from unnecessary exposure, from the illusion that constant brightness equals control. For now, light rests alongside everything else, used carefully, withdrawn intentionally, leaving the port intact, unhurried, and entirely uninterested in being seen. At night, the warehouses do not disappear. They withdraw. Their doors are closed not as a dramatic gesture, but as the final, ordinary movement of a long day that has already decided it has done enough. The hinges do not complain. The wood settles into place with familiarity. Nothing about this closure feels defensive. It feels procedural. These buildings were never designed to be impressive. They were built to hold weight, to resist moisture, to remember what had been placed inside them and for how long. During the day, they absorb noise and movement, the scrape of crates, the counting of amphorae, the low murmur of negotiation. At night, they absorb something else entirely: stillness. The doors are secured with simple measures that have proven sufficient over time. No elaborate devices, no theatrics. Locks that rely on predictability more than force. Everyone knows when these doors close. Everyone knows when they open. Surprise has little room to operate in a system so thoroughly rehearsed. Inside, goods rest without being observed. Grain does not need to be measured again. Oil does not need to be inspected. Wine does not care whether anyone approves of it in the dark. The inventory remains exactly what it was when the doors shut, neither gaining nor losing meaning during the night. There is a particular calm that comes from enclosing abundance and then refusing to think about it for a few hours. The port understands this. Constant attention would not make the goods safer. It would only make the people responsible for them more exhausted. Security here is built on the assumption that most threats are unlikely, precisely because nothing is unusual. The air inside the warehouses holds layered smells: grain dust, old wood, faint traces of oil and resin. These scents do not disperse at night. They thicken slightly, unagitated by movement. The buildings breathe slowly, releasing heat accumulated during the day. Nothing spoils, nothing improves. Time pauses politely. Outside, the closed doors communicate something important without words. There is nothing to do here right now. Anyone passing understands this immediately. The lack of invitation is clear, not hostile, just firm. The port does not need guards to shout instructions. The architecture handles the conversation. It is tempting to imagine that danger lurks in darkness, waiting for an opportunity. The port, however, has learned that danger thrives on disruption, not routine. When everything happens at expected times, with expected outcomes, intrusion becomes difficult. Predictability here is a form of defense. The warehouses trust the night, not blindly but pragmatically. They rely on the fact that most people are elsewhere, resting, eating, sleeping. The port's security strategy assumes that human needs will take precedence over opportunism. Hunger and fatigue are stronger forces than temptation. There is something faintly ironic in how valuable goods are protected by such unremarkable means. No torches flaring, no patrols marching, just closed doors and the shared understanding that morning will arrive soon enough. The empire moves enormous quantities of wealth through these spaces, and then at night it simply leaves them alone. This confidence is not arrogance, it is the result of repetition, of nights when nothing happened and mornings when everything resumed. Over time, the absence of incident becomes evidence. The warehouses do not need to be watched constantly because they have proven they do not require it. Inside, objects wait without anxiety. Amphorae lean against one another, their contents sealed and patient. Crates sit stacked in arrangements decided earlier, not adjusted in the dark. Labels remain unread, numbers remain uncounted. The night does not evaluate, it preserves. The buildings themselves seem heavier at night, as if relieved of the need to accommodate activity. Walls rest, beams settle, the structures return to their primary function, which is not to facilitate trade but to endure. They do this best when left alone. There is no romance here, and that is precisely the point. The warehouses do not symbolize prosperity or power when they are closed. They symbolize continuity, the quiet assumption that what was stored today will still be there tomorrow. This belief does more work than any display of vigilance ever could. Occasionally, a sound escapes from within, wood shifting, something settling. These noises are not alarms. They are reminders that materials respond to temperature and time. The port does not interpret them as threats. It recognizes them as the language of structures, doing exactly what they were built to do. Outside, the lamps cast only enough light to mark the presence of these buildings, not to reveal their contents. The darkness protects as much as it conceals. Without visibility, there is less curiosity. Without curiosity, fewer reasons to linger. The warehouses do not ask to be remembered. They are content to be necessary. Their contribution to the life of the port is measured not in moments, but in decades. They support the movement of goods by being immobile. They enable circulation by remaining closed when circulation has finished for the day. It is easy to underestimate how much restraint this requires. To leave valuable things unattended demands trust, not in people individually, but in systems collectively. The port trusts its rhythms. The warehouses trust the port. This network of mutual reliance holds better than any single act of vigilance. By refusing to dramatize the night, the warehouses make theft uninteresting. There is no spectacle to exploit, no chaos to hide within. Everything is exactly where it is supposed to be. Anyone looking for opportunity would find only predictability. Morning will bring evaluation back into these spaces. Goods will be counted, weighed, judged. But night offers a pause from that scrutiny. Objects are allowed to exist without being assessed. In this suspension, they are simply what they are, not what they are worth. The doors remain closed. The locks remain untouched. The buildings stand quietly, doing nothing visible, and accomplishing everything required of them. This is how the port protects itself, not through tension, but through routine, practiced so thoroughly that it no longer feels like effort. When dawn approaches, the warehouses will wake slowly. Doors will open, light will enter, activity will return, but nothing will have changed overnight, and that is the success of the system. The night passes without incident because it was never treated as a problem to solve. The warehouses sleep with their doors closed, confident that this is enough. When the port reaches the hour where bargaining would feel strange, commerce does not protest. It withdraws without complaint. Voices that spent the day testing boundaries, measuring tone, and pressing advantage simply stop. No one declares a truce. No signal is given. The absence of negotiation spreads quietly, as if everyone arrived at the same conclusion without needing to compare notes. During daylight, words carry weight here. Prices are shaped by emphasis, by pauses, by knowing when to speak and when to wait. Arguments are refined, not loud, but persistent. Each exchange leaves a trace of effort. By night, that effort has already been spent. What remains is a collective understanding that nothing improves when exhaustion leads the conversation. The stalls are empty, not abandoned, just unoccupied. Surfaces that earlier supported scales and samples now hold nothing but shadows. There is no audience to impress, no competitor to outmaneuver. Without listeners, even the most skilled merchant loses interest in performance. Language, deprived of purpose, falls silent. This silence is not imposed, it is chosen. Bargaining requires mutual participation, and tonight that participation is unavailable. Everyone has somewhere else to be, or at least somewhere else to rest. Hunger, fatigue, and routine have more authority than ambition at this hour. The port respects that hierarchy. There is relief in not having to decide anything. No prices to adjust, no concessions to calculate. Value becomes theoretical for a few hours, existing only as a memory of earlier exchanges and a promise of future ones. Goods do not fluctuate in the dark. They remain exactly as they were when the last agreement concluded. The absence of bargaining also changes the emotional climate of the port. Tension drains away. Without negotiation, there is no risk of losing face or advantage. No one needs to defend a position. The night allows everyone to exist without strategy, which is a rare condition in a place built on exchange. Even those who thrive on negotiation accept this pause willingly. They know that sharpness dulls without rest. Wit requires quiet to recover. The most persuasive voice is useless when it cannot find a listener, so they leave their arguments behind along with their ledgers. trusting that both will be intact in the morning. There is something faintly humorous in how quickly seriousness evaporates once bargaining stops. All day, numbers mattered deeply. Margins were guarded. Every phrase carried implication. At night, these concerns dissolve without resistance. The port does not cling to importance when it is no longer useful. This nightly suspension of commerce is not a weakness, it is maintenance. By allowing negotiation to rest, the port preserves its ability to negotiate well. Constant engagement would only degrade judgment. Silence restores proportion. Without bargaining, objects regain a different kind of presence. A jar is no longer a price point. It is a container. Cloth becomes texture rather than currency. Grain is grain, not a figure. This temporary reduction of meaning is not destructive. It is clarifying. The port understands that value is relational. It requires people, time, and context. Remove any one of these and value pauses. Night removes all three at once. People withdraw. Time stretches. Context simplifies. The result is not loss, but suspension. There are no whispered deals after dark. No secret exchanges unfolding in corners. This is not because secrecy is impossible, but because it would be inefficient. The night offers no advantage to negotiation. Without witnesses, agreements lack confirmation. Without energy, compromises lack clarity. It is better to wait. Waiting here is not passive. It is strategic without feeling strategic. Everyone involved knows that tomorrow's conversations will benefit from tonight's quiet. Bargaining postponed is bargaining improved. The port also benefits socially from this pause. Conflicts cool, disagreements lose urgency, resentments have space to fade, silence performs emotional labor that argument cannot. By morning, many tensions will have softened simply because they were not reinforced overnight. There is an unspoken etiquette governing this. No one attempts to reopen negotiations once darkness settles. Doing so would feel rude, not illegal. It would violate the shared understanding that night belongs to rest, not advantage. Social pressure, rather than enforcement, maintains the boundary. This etiquette is powerful precisely because it is informal. There are no penalties written for breaking it. There is only the certainty that doing so would mark one as someone who does not understand how the port functions. Reputation matters more than opportunity. In the absence of bargaining, listening changes. Sounds are no longer filtered for meaning or threat. The water, the occasional creak of wood, the distant footstep, all exist without interpretation. No one asks what a sound wants, it simply is. The night does not erase economic reality. It postpones it. Accounts will still need to balance. Supplies will still need to move. But by refusing to negotiate continuously, the port ensures that these realities are addressed with clarity rather than fatigue. There is a deeper rhythm at work here. Exchange depends on cycles. Opening and closing, speaking and listening, acting and resting. A night without bargaining is as essential as a day full of it. Without contrast, effort loses meaning. The port has learned this lesson through repetition rather than theory. It has discovered that restraint sustains momentum, that silence sharpens future speech, that not every hour needs to justify itself through productivity. As the night deepens, the memory of earlier negotiations fades. Words lose their edge, numbers blur. What remains is a sense of sufficiency. Enough was done today. More can be done tomorrow. This sufficiency is not complacency. It is calibration. The port measures success not by constant motion, but by continuity over time. A single night without bargaining does not threaten prosperity. It protects it. When dawn approaches, voices will return, arguments will be rebuilt, prices will be tested again. The silence will retreat without complaint, having served its purpose. But for now, the port exists in a rare state of economic neutrality, where nothing needs to be decided. The night holds this neutrality gently. It does not rush it. It does not dramatize it. It simply allows it to exist long enough to matter. In a world that often equates value with noise, the port demonstrates another truth. Sometimes the most productive thing an economy can do is stop talking for a while. By the time night settles into a shape that feels complete, people begin to leave the port without explaining themselves. There is no signal to mark this moment, no shared glance, no declaration that the workday has officially ended. Absence arrives quietly, one body at a time, until presence becomes optional and then unnecessary. No one announces departure because there is no audience left that requires reassurance. The port does not ask for closure. It does not need to be told that someone is done. It understands the pattern. People come, people work, people leave. The sequence repeats often enough that explanation would feel redundant. A worker finishes stacking the last crate and simply does not return. A sailor adjusts a rope one final time and walks away without looking back. Someone who spent the entire day lifting, counting, negotiating, or waiting decides that the night belongs elsewhere. The decision is personal and entirely unremarkable. What disappears first is noise. Conversations trail off mid-thought and are not resumed. Laughter finds no echo. Instructions stop being given because there is no one left who needs them. The port does not mourn this silence. It absorbs it. The people who leave do so with practiced efficiency. They know which paths lead away. They know where they are going. No one hesitates, as if unsure whether leaving is allowed. Permission has been implied by repetition. The absence of resistance becomes confirmation. There is something faintly ironic in how the port empties itself. During the day, it relies on bodies to function. At night, it relies on their absence to continue functioning. Too many people lingering would only complicate things. The port works best when it knows how to let go. No one stays to guard emptiness. There is no figure assigned to stand watch over inactivity. This is not negligence, it is trust. Trust in routine. Trust in the fact that nothing requires attention right now. Trust that attention can be resumed later without penalty. Those who leave do not carry a sense of importance with them. They do not feel that their departure marks a moment worth recording. Their contribution has already been made. Staying longer would not increase its value. Leaving preserves it. The port does not remember who left first or last. It does not track the order of disappearance. It does not assign meaning to timing. Absence accumulates gradually, like darkness, until it feels complete, without anyone noticing exactly when that happened. Even the idea of being missed does not apply here. The port is not a room waiting to feel empty. It is a system transitioning to another state. People are not removed. They are no longer required. This distinction matters. As individuals withdraw, the environment adapts seamlessly. Spaces that were crowded become passable. Areas that required coordination become inert. Tools remain where they were last used, not because someone forgot them, but because they will be needed again soon enough. There is no anxiety in this retreat. No one worries that leaving might cause something to fail. Experience has taught them otherwise. Failure usually comes from overextension, not withdrawal. Knowing when to stop is part of competence. The night accepts these departures without commentary. It does not frame them as endings. It does not slow them down. It simply allows them to happen. The absence of spectacle is deliberate. Anything more would be unnecessary. Somewhere beyond the port, meals are being eaten, shoes are being removed, bodies are lowering themselves into rest. None of this concerns the harbor. It does not follow its people home. It does not demand loyalty beyond the hours when loyalty is useful. The people who leave do not feel heroic. They are not completing a chapter. They are returning to ordinary life. That ordinariness is precisely what sustains the port over time. Grand gestures would exhaust it. Quiet exits preserve it. There is also an economy to this disappearance. Less movement means less wear. Less sound means less strain. Fewer decisions mean fewer mistakes. By thinning itself of people, the port reduces the number of variables it must manage. It is easy to overlook how coordinated this uncoordinated departure really is. No one instructs it, yet it unfolds reliably. The port has trained its people without ever formalizing the lesson. They have learned through repetition that leaving at the right time is as important as arriving. The port does not reward those who stay late. There is no recognition for endurance after usefulness has ended. This absence of reward discourages unnecessary presence. Efficiency is measured not in hours spent, but in work completed and rest preserved. As the last few figures drift away, their footsteps do not echo with significance. Stone receives sound and releases it. Nothing lingers. The night remains unconcerned with who was there earlier. It has no memory to maintain. This is where history often looks away. There are no speeches here, no final acts, just people choosing not to be present anymore. It is difficult to dramatize such restraint. It does not fit neatly into narratives that prefer beginnings and climaxes. And yet, this quiet evacuation is what allows the port to persist. By emptying itself of people, it protects them from fatigue and protects itself from error. Absence becomes an act of maintenance. Even those whose labor is most essential understand this. They do not confuse indispensability with permanence. They know that the port does not need them right now. It needs them tomorrow. Leaving ensures they can return capable. The night continues to deepen as the last movements fade. Doors remain closed. Ships remain still. Water continues its rhythm. The absence of people does not create a void. It creates balance. There is a subtle humility in this. The port does not pretend to be alive on its own. It acknowledges its dependence on people without clinging to them. It allows itself to become temporarily empty without interpreting that emptiness as loss. When morning comes, people will reappear just as quietly as they left. There will be no announcement of return either. Presence will accumulate again, one body at a time, until activity resumes and absence becomes optional instead. This cycle is so reliable that it requires no oversight. The port does not track attendance. It does not fear abandonment. It knows that people leave because they intend to come back. This confidence is earned. In a culture that often celebrates staying power, the port teaches another lesson. Knowing when to leave is not weakness. It is understanding the system well enough to trust it without constant supervision. So the people go. Not in silence meant to impress, but in silence that feels appropriate. They leave behind a port that does not need them for a few hours, and a night that knows how to hold their absence without consequence. If someone were asked to name what truly holds the port together at night, they might point to the stone keys or the heavy doors of the warehouses. They would be understandable guesses. These things are visible. They endure. They look like answers. And yet none of them function alone. Remove routine, and the most solid structures become uncertain shapes in the dark. Routine is not impressive. It does not announce itself or demand admiration. It arrives quietly, already familiar, repeating actions so ordinary that no one thinks to praise them. And still, it is routine that allows the port to exist without supervision when the night settles fully into place. Every step taken earlier in the day was shaped by expectation. People knew when ships would arrive, when goods would be moved, when doors would close. None of this required constant instruction. The knowledge lived in bodies and timing rather than in words. By night, this knowledge continues to operate, even as activity withdraws. The port does not need to be watched closely because it has been practiced thoroughly. Routine replaces vigilance. When everyone knows what usually happens next, there is little need to remain alert for surprises. Predictability absorbs risk more efficiently than tension ever could. The lamps that remain lit are positioned where they always are. The paths that remain open follow familiar lines. Doors close at times that feel natural rather than enforced. The sequence is so established that deviation would feel awkward. Routine creates gravity. It pulls behavior into alignment without force. What makes routine powerful is not its rigidity, but its flexibility. It can adjust without losing shape. A ship arriving slightly late does not disrupt the night. A door closing earlier than usual does not cause confusion. The system accommodates small variations because the overall pattern remains intact. Routine also distributes responsibility evenly. No single person carries the burden of ensuring continuity. Each individual contributes by doing what they have done many times before. The system does not rely on exceptional effort. It relies on average behavior repeated consistently. This is why the port can afford to be quiet. Silence does not threaten routine. It reinforces it. Without constant stimulation, patterns become clearer. The absence of noise allows expectation to do its work without interference. There is a subtle humor in how much effort humans put into constructing visible infrastructure while trusting invisible habits to hold it all together. Walls crack, wood rots, iron corrodes, routine adapts. It shifts just enough to remain functional. It survives change by absorbing it gradually. At night, routine becomes more apparent precisely because so little else is happening. The lack of activity reveals the underlying structure, the order in which lights go out, the way footsteps fade from certain paths before others, the timing of doors, and the spacing of sounds. None of this is random, it is learned. The port does not document these patterns. They are not written down or formalized. They do not need to be. They persist through imitation rather than instruction. Newcomers learn by watching. Long-time workers move without thinking. Routine becomes second nature, and then invisible. This invisibility is its greatest strength. Because routine is not constantly examined, it does not invite interference. It operates below the level of debate. No one questions whether doors should close at night. They simply do. No one argues about when to leave. They just leave. Routine also prevents escalation. Without constant decision-making, there is little room for conflict. The night does not ask for opinions. It proceeds according to established rhythm. Disagreement requires engagement. Routine requires acceptance. The port's routine extends beyond individual actions. It includes expectations about tomorrow. People go to sleep assuming that the same structures will still be there. That assumption allows rest to be deep rather than anxious. Confidence replaces vigilance. There is something quietly radical about this. An empire that depends on expansion relies on repetition to sustain itself. Movement depends on pause. Change depends on stability. Routine is the mechanism that balances these forces without drawing attention to itself. At night, routine reveals its full value. Without it, darkness would feel uncertain. With it, darkness becomes merely another condition. The port does not need to be awake to continue functioning because routine remains active even when people are not. This does not mean the port is static. Routine does not freeze time. It channels it. By repeating what works, the port creates space for gradual adaptation. Change enters quietly, through small adjustments, rather than dramatic breaks. The warehouses close the same way they always have, but the contents shift over years. The ships tie their ropes in familiar patterns, but destinations evolve. Routine remains while context changes. This separation allows continuity without stagnation. It is easy to mistake routine for boredom. From the outside, repetition looks dull. From within, it feels efficient. The port does not seek excitement at night, it seeks preservation. Routine provides exactly that. There is also comfort in knowing what will happen next. For those who work here, routine reduces cognitive load. Decisions are minimized. Energy is conserved. The night becomes a space for recovery rather than problem solving. The port understands that constant novelty is exhausting. It limits how much change it introduces at any given moment. Night is reserved for sameness. Day can handle variation. Routine also acts as a social equalizer. At night, hierarchy softens. Everyone follows the same patterns. No one negotiates special exceptions. The same darkness applies to all. Routine erases distinction without needing to challenge it. There is no ceremony celebrating routine, no monuments dedicated to it, and yet, without routine, monuments would stand empty and useless. Infrastructure without habit is decoration. Habit without infrastructure finds ways to persist. The night deepens and routine continues to operate quietly. Lamps burn where they should, doors remain closed, ships stay still. People are absent in expected ways. Nothing requires attention because everything is behaving as anticipated. Morning will eventually disrupt this balance. Activity will return, decisions will multiply, noise will increase. Routine will shift from maintenance to execution, but it will still be there, shaping behavior beneath the surface. For now, routine holds the port together without effort. It is the unseen framework that allows everything else to relax. The port does not need to prove its strength at night. It demonstrates it by continuing without supervision. In a world that often confuses importance with visibility, the port offers another model. What matters most is rarely what is seen. It is what is repeated quietly, consistently, and without the need for explanation. Routine is the real infrastructure here. Stone may support weight, wood may resist time, but routine supports trust, and trust is what allows the port to sleep. Silence arrives at the port not as an interruption, but as an alignment. It settles into the spaces left behind by movement, speech, and decision, fitting so naturally that it feels less like something new and more like something restored. The night does not demand quiet. It allows it. And the port responds by functioning more smoothly, not less. This silence is not empty. It is filled with familiar, low-level sounds that require no interpretation. Water continues its steady contact with stone. Wood adjusts to temperature and moisture. Somewhere a rope shifts slightly against a post. These sounds do not compete. They coexist. Silence here is not the absence of sound, but the absence of unnecessary sound. During the day, noise performs work. It coordinates, signals, negotiates. At night, that work has already been completed. Continuing to generate sound would not improve outcomes. It would only introduce friction. Silence reduces the number of variables the port must manage. In this quieter state, the port becomes easier to maintain. Fewer inputs mean fewer errors. Without overlapping voices and movements, systems can rest in their most stable configuration. Nothing needs to be corrected because nothing is being pushed beyond its limits. Silence also changes perception. Without constant stimulation, attention narrows naturally. Any deviation becomes noticeable precisely because the background is so consistent. If something were wrong, it would stand out. Silence, then, is not blindness. It is contrast. There is a kind of discipline embedded in this. The port does not silence itself completely. It allows only what is essential to remain audible. Everything else fades. This selective quiet is learned behavior, refined over generations. Too much silence would feel unnatural. Too little would be exhausting. People who work here understand this intuitively. They lower their voices as night deepens, not because they are told to, but because the environment invites restraint. Loudness feels out of place. Excess movement feels inefficient. Silence becomes a shared agreement rather than an imposed rule. This agreement is powerful because it is voluntary. No authority enforces it. No penalties are attached. Social understanding does the work. Everyone benefits from the quiet, so everyone contributes to it without negotiation. The silence of the port also acts as a buffer. It separates one day from the next, creating a boundary that prevents fatigue from accumulating endlessly. Without this pause, work would blur into itself, losing definition. Silence restores edges. There is something faintly ironic about how much effort human societies expend trying to eliminate silence. We often treat it as a problem to solve, a gap to fill. The port demonstrates another possibility. Silence can be a tool, a stabilizer, a form of maintenance. At night, silence absorbs minor imperfections, a misaligned crate, a rope tied slightly off-center. These things do not demand immediate correction. They can wait. Silence gives permission to delay, which is sometimes the most functional choice available. The port does not interpret silence as inactivity. Systems are still in place. Agreements still hold. Nothing has been suspended permanently. Silence is simply the mode in which continuity is preserved without consumption of energy. Even the concept of vigilance changes here. Instead of constant alertness, the port relies on absence of disturbance. Silence becomes a signal that all is well. The lack of noise confirms that routines are holding. This does not mean the port is vulnerable. On the contrary, silence makes vulnerability easier to detect. An unexpected sound would draw attention precisely because everything else is quiet. Noise becomes information only when silence is the norm. The buildings seem to participate in this quiet willingly. Walls hold sound rather than reflecting it. Surfaces absorb rather than amplify. The architecture was shaped by experience, learning how to coexist with silence rather than fight it. Ships, too, benefit from this environment. Without constant vibration and movement, materials relax. Stress distributes evenly. Silence allows structures to settle into their most balanced state. This reduces wear over time. There is also a psychological dimension to this. Silence reassures. It signals that nothing requires immediate response, that the world, for a few hours, can be trusted to continue without intervention. This trust allows rest to be deeper and more effective. The port understands that silence does not erase problems. It postpones them appropriately. Some issues are better addressed with clarity rather than urgency. Silence creates the conditions for that clarity to return in the morning. In this way, silence becomes an investment. It sacrifices immediate activity in favor of long-term functionality. The port trades a few hours of engagement for decades of reliability. It is telling that silence is most complete when everything is working correctly. When systems align, noise diminishes naturally. Silence is not forced. It emerges. The night holds this silence gently. It does not rush it or dramatize it. It simply allows it to exist long enough to perform its work. The port does not resist this. It depends on it. As dawn approaches, silence will begin to thin. Sounds will return gradually. Voices will test their volume. Movement will re-enter the space. Silence will retreat without complaint, having done exactly what was required of it. Nothing will be said about it. No one will mark the moment when silence ended. It will simply be replaced by activity, just as activity was replaced by silence before. In this cycle, silence is not an absence between important events. It is one of the events, a necessary phase in the functioning of the port. Without it, nothing else would hold together for long. The port does not fear silence. It cultivates it. It knows that quiet is not emptiness, but structure at rest. And rest, when done properly, is one of the most reliable forms of work. The port does not think of itself as important. This is not humility performed for effect, nor is it ignorance. It is simply an absence of self-narration. The harbor exists to function, not to reflect on its role within larger stories that will be told later by people who were not there at night. During the day, significance is projected onto it constantly. Goods pass through and acquire meaning because of where they came from and where they will go. Names are spoken. Routes are traced. Influence is implied. By night, all of this dissolves. The port sheds the weight of interpretation and returns to being a place where things happen and then stop happening for a while. Nothing here pauses to ask whether it matters. Ships do not wonder if they are contributing to something greater. Warehouses do not measure their historical value. Lamps do not feel symbolic as they burn low. The port does not curate itself for memory. It assumes tomorrow will be much like today, and that assumption is enough. There is something deeply practical about this lack of imagination. Importance, once imagined, becomes a burden. It demands justification. It invites performance. The port avoids this by refusing to consider itself exceptional. It does not need to live up to a reputation. It only needs to remain usable. At night, this attitude becomes especially clear. With fewer people present to project meaning, the harbor slips into anonymity with ease. Stone becomes stone, water becomes water, wood becomes wood. The environment sheds narrative and settles into material reality. The absence of self-importance also prevents anxiety. The port does not fear decline because it does not frame itself as an achievement that could be lost. It is not trying to maintain an image. It is maintaining function. This distinction matters more than it appears. Many places suffer from the weight of their own stories. They begin to act as if they are being watched, evaluated, compared. The port does not share this concern. It behaves as though no one is looking, even when many are. This allows it to remain efficient rather than performative. The night reinforces this. Without crowds or commentary, there is no stage, no audience. The port does not fill the silence with gestures meant to signal relevance. It lets the quiet speak for itself, which is to say, it lets nothing speak at all. There is a faint irony here. The very reason this port will later be considered important is because it did not waste energy trying to appear so. It facilitated movement by not insisting on recognition. It enabled connection by not demanding attention. At night, ships remain because remaining is what makes sense. Not because staying contributes to a larger narrative, but because leaving would be impractical. Warehouses close because closure preserves goods, not because it signifies order. Every action is justified by immediate utility rather than abstract meaning. This approach also simplifies decision-making. Without the pressure of significance, choices become straightforward. What works stays, what does not is adjusted. There is no need to preserve tradition for its own sake or innovate merely to demonstrate vitality. The port evolves quietly, guided by necessity rather than ambition. The people who work here adopt this mindset as well. They do not walk with the awareness that they are participating in history. They walk because the path leads where they need to go. They leave when their work is done, not because their absence will be noticed, but because rest is required. History later will impose structure and interpretation. It will decide which ports mattered and which did not. It will draw lines and assign significance retroactively. The port, meanwhile, continues without concern for this future attention. It is busy doing what allows attention to exist at all. There is relief in this. To exist without needing to be meaningful is a rare condition. The port experiences it every night. Freed from the burden of importance, it becomes lighter, more adaptable, more resilient. The darkness contributes to this anonymity. Without light to highlight features, distinctions blur. The port becomes a collection of silhouettes rather than landmarks. It is harder to assign value when details are obscured. This suits the harbor just fine. Nothing here strives to be remembered. Memory is someone else's project. The port focuses on continuity. It ensures that doors will open, ships will move, goods will pass. Whether or not these actions are recorded is irrelevant to their success. This indifference to legacy is not short-sightedness. It is an understanding of scale. The port knows, in a way that does not require articulation, that systems endure longer when they are not burdened with self-awareness. Reflection slows action. Confidence comes from repetition, not recognition. The night allows the port to practice this indifference fully. Without witnesses, it can exist exactly as it is. No adjustments for perception, no gestures for effect, just presence. There is a subtle kind of dignity in this, not the dignity of ceremony or display, but the dignity of sufficiency. The port is enough. It does not need to be more than it is. It does not need to explain itself. When morning comes, attention will return. People will attribute value again. The port will accept this without resistance. It will allow itself to be used, interpreted, praised, criticized, but it will not internalize any of it. It will continue to function as it always has. In this way, the port avoids the trap of identity. It does not define itself by scale, influence, or reputation. It defines itself by operation, by whether things move when they should and stop when they must. This is perhaps the quietest form of confidence. To exist without insisting on significance. To contribute without demanding acknowledgement. To persist without narrative. The port does not imagine its importance, and because of that, it remains important in the only way that matters. It continues. The night at the Roman Mediterranean port does not end with anticipation. No one stands awake wondering whether morning will arrive. There is no sense of suspense, no holding of breath. Dawn is not a reward to be earned or a miracle to be hoped for. It is assumed, quietly and completely, long before the first light considers appearing. This assumption is not careless, it is earned. It rests on repetition so consistent that doubt would feel unnecessary. The port has seen enough mornings to trust the pattern. It has survived nights that looked exactly like this one countless times before. Expectation here is not optimism. It is memory. Nothing in the port is preparing for morning in an active way. There are no rehearsals. No one is staging readiness. Ships remain still without checking the horizon. Doors stay closed without counting minutes. Lamps burn low without signaling transition. The system does not require constant reminders of what comes next. It already knows. This is perhaps the most striking feature of the night. Not its silence, not its darkness, but its confidence. A confidence so unremarkable that it barely registers. The port does not wait for confirmation. It does not look for omens. It trusts continuity more than signs. The idea of morning exists here as a certainty rather than a moment. It does not need to be marked. It does not need to be welcomed. It is simply the next condition the port will adapt to, just as it adapted tonight. The transition requires no emotional investment. This attitude reshapes how the night feels. Without the pressure of expectation, time loosens. Hours pass without being measured against an outcome. The night is not a tunnel leading somewhere else. It is a space that is complete in itself, allowed to exist without justification. People sleep with this same assumption. They do not rest lightly, prepared to react. They rest deeply, trusting that the structures they rely on will still be there when they wake. This trust is not naive, it is practical. Anxiety would add nothing. The port does not fear interruption. It does not imagine catastrophe lurking behind darkness. That kind of thinking would require energy it has no reason to spend. Systems that endure do not rehearse disaster every night. They conserve attention for when it is needed. There is something faintly ironic about how history often portrays such places. Later narratives will frame mornings as beginnings, nights as thresholds, ports as stages for change. The port itself experiences none of this drama. It moves from one condition to another with minimal commentary. Morning, when it comes, will not announce itself loudly. It will arrive gradually, a subtle change in the color of the sky, a shift in temperature, the water reflecting light instead of absorbing it. The port will respond automatically without pausing to recognize the moment. Doors will open not because dawn demands it, but because it is time. Ships will prepare to move not because the sun has risen, but because the conditions for movement have returned. Activity resumes not out of excitement, but out of alignment. This is why the night does not rush. There is no fear of missing something. Nothing important depends on witnessing the transition. The port does not need observers to validate its continuity. It proceeds regardless. The assumption of morning also explains why the night is allowed to be quiet. Silence does not threaten the future. It supports it. Rest ensures that the return of activity will be functional rather than forced. The port protects tomorrow by refusing to exhaust itself tonight. Even the absence of people contributes to this readiness. By leaving, they preserve their ability to return capable. The port does not cling to presence. It values preparedness over display. Morning is built on absence as much as on action. There is a deeper lesson embedded here, one the port does not articulate, but lives. Stability does not require constant attention. In fact, constant attention often signals instability. The most reliable systems are those that can afford to stop watching themselves for a while. The night demonstrates this principle fully. Nothing is guarded obsessively. Nothing is monitored for meaning. Everything is trusted to behave according to pattern. And because it does, that trust is reinforced. This is not to say that the port is careless. It has learned its limits. It knows which routines must hold and which can bend. It knows which absences are safe and which would be alarming. This knowledge is the product of long familiarity, not vigilance. Morning is already built into the night, not as a promise, but as a consequence. The night exists because the day has finished. The next day will exist because the night is allowed to complete itself without interference. There is no emotional climax here, no revelation. The port does not learn anything new by making it through another night. It simply confirms what it already knew. That continuity is maintained by restraint. That rest is a form of work. That silence can be productive. History prefers moments of change. It searches for turning points, for nights that mattered, for mornings that altered trajectories. This night will not stand out. It will blur into countless others, and that is precisely why it succeeds. The port does not need to be remembered for this night. It needs to remain functional because of it. Memory belongs to historians. Continuity belongs to systems. As the hours pass and the sky begins its slow shift, nothing in the port reacts prematurely. No one rushes to be first. No one treats dawn as an event. The transition happens when it happens. This calm acceptance is the final condition that allows the port to endure. Not ambition, not vigilance, but trust in repetition. Trust in the idea that what has worked will likely work again, provided it is not interfered with unnecessarily. Morning is already assumed because doubt would serve no purpose. The port has learned that certainty does not need to be loud. It can exist quietly beneath awareness, shaping behavior without announcing itself. When the day returns, the port will wake as it always does, without surprise, without relief, without celebration. Just another adjustment, another phase, another opportunity to continue. The night releases the port back into motion, not with a gesture, but by ending naturally. Nothing needs to be undone. Nothing needs to be declared complete. The system has rested. That is enough. And so the story closes not with an ending, but with a handoff. Night gives way to day without commentary. The port continues without reflection. Morning was never in question. It was simply waiting its turn.